Welcome into another episode of Tailgate Talk SEC. I am Will Thomas, and today we are winding down our transfer portal series. Only 4 or 5 schools left, and today we have got the South Carolina Gamecocks. Now, Carolina, the roster talent was pretty good last season, right? The individual pieces, I was pretty high on them. Then they only won 4 games. So it was not a good year for Carolina, and you can point to a million different reasons as to why the season didn't really go the way they wanted it to. But Beamer tried to address those issues this year in the portal. They brought in some pretty good players. Now they did lose some solid guys, and there are still plenty of question marks, obviously, with the South Carolina roster. But let's go through their transfer portal recap, the ins and the outs, and really break down what this roster, in part, is going to look like ahead of this season. So starting off with who was leaving the program. Vandrevius Jacobs, a wide receiver, he had 32 catches for over 500 yards and 4 scores last season, so he was pretty productive. He was a part of that crew in the receiver room behind Nick Harbor that you were kind of just waiting on to see if it would develop, how much better it would get. So he was a pretty productive guy, 6 foot, 182. He's definitely a playmaker that they'll miss, but Carolina did do a decent job of backfilling into the receiver room, and we'll get to that later. Boaz Stanley on the interior of the offensive line, he's not like he's going to be a first round pick, at least yet, as it currently stands. Not like he's the superstar guy, but he was a staple on that interior of the offensive line. He could play center, he can move him around a little bit. So Boaz is a guy they'll miss on the offensive line. A quick defensive player here, Desmond Umeozulu coming off the edge. He was 6'6", 255, so he's just got alien traits. Sort of a Dylan Stewart light. I don't want to say that like it's insulting, but he wasn't quite what Dylan Stewart was. But he had some pretty good stats. He had some pretty good production, some good tape. He's definitely a guy off the edge that you'll miss this year if you are Carolina. Back to offense here. It's just kind of a weird player, man. Aaron Noland, the quarterback. He was highly rated. He's already bounced around a few schools. Blue chip guy who just hasn't panned out yet. And, just in the instance of air for moving on to this season, there's just no room for him there with Lenora Sellers in Columbia. So if Lenore's had transferred out this past year, I think maybe you do see Noland stay and take over the reins. But with Lenora Sellers still being in Columbia, there just wasn't any room for Aaron Noland to stick around. And just some other guys who did leave Carolina this year, Xavion Hardy, off the defensive lineman, Jerron Willis, a linebacker. They lost Michael Smith at tight end, Tree Babeladen offensive tackle. So there were a decent bit of solid contributors at key positions that did leave the Gamecocks this year. But let's go to how they backfilled. First off, their best out of the portal that is now having people hold their breath. It is Jacarrius Peak, the offensive tackle from NC State. He's a superstar. I mean, this was a massive portal win. They beat out Alabama for him, but he got injured playing basketball, and he's going to miss all of spring. And the team is hopeful that he's ready to start the year. So I'm not super worried about just the idea of him missing spring. Even though he's a transfer, I'm not as concerned with a guy as experienced as Jacarrius, missing spring and then being a step behind. I think he's talented enough where that won't matter. My only worry is he healthy in August, and how healthy is he in August? Because you don't want to rush him back and then lose him for the entire year just for getting him back for like the first 1 or 2 games. So they have to be careful with him, but also kind of have a sense of urgency because Peak is such a big part of what this offense wants to do with how powerful he's going to be as a blocker in both the passing game and the running game. So the Gamecocks need him back, and we'll see what his health is. But I do imagine that we'll see him for most of the year. The question is just, how early does he come back? Defensively, they had a couple of ads here on the D-line that I'm pretty excited about. Starting off with Caleb Herring coming off the edge from Tennessee. He's 6'5", 245. He had 4 sacks last season, and why I'm so excited about him is because he's such a good pairing with Dylan Stewart. You saw Dylan Stewart in his freshman year. Obviously, this guy's a freak, but he had so much help on the defensive line, which really ISO'd him, freed him up to go get his own. He didn't quite have that same degree of help last season. Now with Caleb Herring on the other edge, I do believe he has that help back. So you'll see, even though Herring will take some of those sacks because of how good of a player he is, it's going to free Stewart up to get even more of his own. So I think that Herring and Dylan Stewart sneakily is one of the better edge rush combos that we have in the conference this year. And then some other D linemen they pulled over. Kelby Collins, who was at Florida, then Alabama most recently, and now he's at Carolina. He's a great extra piece on the D line. He was a blue chipper. He had multiple sacks last year. So you're seeing Beamer go back to that blueprint on the D line that he had 2 years ago, which was production at every spot. Not really a position that the offensive line, the opposing O line, can sleep on. So then you can't really double team anybody. You have to be one-on-one, and that will really allow your playmakers on the D-line to go get there and just wreak havoc all game long. Another D-lineman, more on the interior here, is Jordan Thomas from Georgia. He was a former blue chipper, a top 15 D-lineman in his class. I thought last year with Georgia, as a freshman, we might have seen him really make some noise in Athens. That didn't really happen. So, and then he left Kirby Smart. So I was, that was, I thought that with Kirby bringing in this guy, I thought he'd be, really impactful as a freshman. I thought he'd be a superstar. The fact that he's leaving Kirby, I don't want to say he can't be a superstar, but I'm a little lower on his potential, at least right now. I think down the line, obviously, you see his physical traits. You do watch some of his tape. The flashes are there. I don't believe he's immediately a superstar, but like I said, with Dylan Stewart, Caleb Herring, Kelby Collins, also on the D line, this is a guy who's good enough where when all the attention is going to those guys, he's going to be just a black hole in the middle of that D lineman. So Jordan Thomas, I do believe, could break out in a pretty big way for Carolina this year, given the pieces around him. And then a pair of receivers that I want to talk about because of that receiver room really being the bottleneck of that offense in the past. First off is Nitro Tuggle, who came from Purdue. He was at Georgia, Purdue. Now he's at Carolina. He had 34 catches for 500 yards and 4 scores last year. And just like I said, Nick Harbor needs some help. And a guy like Nitro was a big part of that. And another one, a jump ball threat, a bigger guy from Oklahoma is Jaden Gibson, who they also bring into the portal to Columbia this year. He had 14 catches for 375 and 5 scores last year. But Gibson is 6'5", 186. So you kind of do bring in a dichotomy of receiver sizes. And Jaden Gibson, who's 6'5", bigger jump ball threat, and Nitro Tuggle, who's more of a smaller slot guy, gadget guy. So you bring in both of those pieces. Nick Harbor can pretty much play anywhere because of his traits. So that receiver room is really starting to fill out a little bit. And I'm excited about the playmakers that Carolina now has out wide to help out Nick Harbor. They also brought in DJ Black, a receiver from UCF. So that is, that's pretty much the notable pieces that Carolina brought in the portal this year. So we'll dive into their whole roster in a few weeks here when we get to that part of our summer previews. But the portal class really wasn't that bad at all. Like, it was a solid portal class. Now, you do obviously have to take that with a grain of salt because they're kind of just backfilling a bunch of, legitimate losses also. So it's not like you're really elevating the roster with every move. But D-line, massive improvements. Massive improvements along the D-line. My concern is offensive line, obviously, because of the Jacarrius Peak injury. But if you get him back healthy, you win the offensive line. You've won the defensive line. I believe they've won the receivers in terms of the portal with how much production they get. I think that Carolina really did win the portal, and they addressed a bunch of the needs that they had coming into this season. So as we break down the whole roster, we'll break down the schedule, we'll get a full preview of Carolina's season, but their portal class is really good. You just cannot sleep on the talent of this Carolina team with who they brought in the portal, and then just that trio of Lenore Sellers, Nick Harbor, and Dylan Stewart. Those three super sharp potential players. So if you have been enjoying this portal content and your team is one of those last alphabetically that I'll get to soon, subscribe to me here and follow me on Twitter. I'll be doing college football, SEC football all summer long leading up to the season. I've been Will Thomas, and thank you so much for watching.